Well, hi. Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm the facilitator, Courtney Shaw, and I'm very pleased to welcome two new speakers to our little family here today. Before I do that, I do want to say thank you to Jacob and the LCC Library Learning Commons for bringing out related books if people are interested. And remember, we also have an event tonight. The Social Sciences Department is presenting the Vest Memorial Lecture, so I have some flyers on that, as well as the rest of our community conversation series in the back, so you can pick up a flyer if you are interested. And today I want to welcome Ryan Marr and Douglas Detrick. Ryan is a jazz guitarist and composer with 9 albums under his own direction. He is also a prolific jazz educator. He is the jazz director of Lower Columbia College and also teaches at University of Portland and Mount Hood Community College. In late 2022, he became the artistic director of the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble. Douglas Detrick is a composer, trumpeter, podcast producer, writer, and arts leader based in Portland, Oregon. His musical works make distinctive, concrete connections to story and place by combining his background in jazz, chamber music, and electronic music with audio storytelling and podcasting to tell stories in a unique way. He seeks to amplify the voices of marginalized people through his work, combining words and music to help not just the content, but also the spirit of the stories reach his listeners. He is the former executive director and now board member of the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble. He founded Substrate Arts Consulting in 2022 to provide consulting services for artists and organizations. Please welcome Ryan and Doug.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here.
Yeah, thanks. Wanted to represent LCC Jazz here today, and Doug's got a TJC shirt on, so
TJC shirt.
dressed down a little bit. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful day here indoors, and it could easily be outdoors enjoying the sunshine. Yeah, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about this new term, community guided creativity, what it means and why it matters. We thought we might start with like why we wanted to talk to you about it. And I know that one reason I wanted to participate in this is to perhaps inspire members in this community here in Longview and how they might engage this community in Longview with creative efforts in the arts and beyond. And do you have any additional?
So I'm Doug, because this is the first time we're meeting me, but let's see, what did I want to add to that? Right. The reason, and I would add to that to say that the other reason we had for wanting to give this talk together is because we've done several of these projects together and learned a lot through them that we can share and talk about together. And so just thought it'd be a good thing to talk about. And the nice thing also about the idea of a community is a community can be many different things. So and we're going to talk a bit about that. But what that does is it kind of opens up lots of opportunities in the arts to be able to talk about many different subjects and to many different groups of people, and do it in ways that are engaging and fun. Also, you know, I think the arts kind of open up people's imagination to a topic. You know, maybe it's something. I've always been really interested in history, and so history has been. You'll see that it factors into a lot of these projects because it's just something that I love and was kind of connected to some folks in that community. But it could be science, it could be health, it could be housing, any of the important issues that we are talking about these days. So that's just one fun thing. And then music and any of the arts can be about anything. So why not find something that matters to a group of people and make it fun, make it imaginative, make it creative. So.
Yeah, maybe one thing I was going to add to that is why we're even doing this together, why the two of us. Douglas and I have been working together closely for nearly a decade. No, about a decade, I think. We worked mostly with the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble. And one thing I can say about both of us, I can speak for Doug on this behalf, is we're community guys. We like to engage our community and also grow our community. And we can share with you some of those ideas about how we have done that, how we hope to do better in the future. But you know, Douglas does things beyond the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble and now Substrate Arts Consulting, and I do things besides playing guitar and teaching music. I co-founded a jazz festival that was community minded in Portland. Yeah, so we're community people, and that's why we're here today, is to kind of share that. So why don't we go on?
Let's go on. So what is community guided creativity? So we came up with this definition just to get started, and we'll add more to it, and your understanding will grow over time too. But we defined it in this way: creating new work in a process where the community has helped to set the priorities.
Yeah, I'm still good with it.
Yeah, you're still okay with that? Yeah. Yeah, we were like, well, let's see, how is the community involved? And that can be, you'll see it can be in a lot of different things. So we just thought, well, what was most important about these projects that we have experience with was that we had some conversations, in some ways much similar to this one, where we were just asking, we said, okay, we're going to create a piece of music, and we'd like to hear what you might like to see in it, what's important to you. And so that idea of setting priorities and saying, well, we'd really love to hear about maybe more about this issue, and this is the most important thing to us. This other thing's maybe not as much important. So that idea of setting priorities, and then the artists take those priorities and then they make a piece, create an event and bring it back to this community.
And this is different because typically, like, even if you came to an LCC jazz concert, you would, as a community member, just sit there as an audience member, and the musicians would do their thing, and I'd be up there waving my hands. And usually the work that we are presenting is written by one person. Usually it's a man, and they just have their artistic vision and they write their thing, and then we play it. And so it's kind of like a linear process, and this is less linear. This is, I don't even know what the shape is, but
it's like that.
Yeah, dovetails and so.
Yeah, and it's, to add to that, like another metaphor is like, if you think of what a composer is, we're talking about music, so we talk about a composer a lot of the time. And there doesn't need to be a composer. There can be more than one composer in music, but a lot of times you think of that person as this lone genius that goes off and then they come back and they give you the score, and then it's all done. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's still certainly good and valid, but there are other ways to get different results. And so that's kind of what we were most interested in.
Or a novelist, right? They have that imagery of, Hemingway going to his little, just sitting in the dark and drinking and writing a novel, that's not so community minded. It's brilliant, but it's that, this is kind of a different approach to creating work.
Yeah. Another good metaphor. All right, the community. So we just wanted to mark a space in this to talk about what that word community means, because it can mean many, many different things. And like, it's almost, I don't know, we could just like name examples, but like, I don't know, there can be a community around a church. There can be a community around a neighborhood. There can be around an interest, like knitting or woodcrafting or economics. And so a lot of times you think about, well, what is this community? What kind of binds them together? Why do you put them in a group together? And so it's people that care about a certain thing in a certain way. They may have similar interests. They may have a similar background, professional or personal. Any other?
Well, maybe we could open it up at like, what is you right here in front? So right in front. What's your name? Right in front here. What's your name? Yeah. Akaya. What is a community that you belong to?
Well, I belong to the local astronomy club.
There you go. Yeah, a bunch of people
Perfect. Yeah.
that like looking up at the night sky. Yeah, that's a community for sure. Does anybody have any other examples of communities they belong to? Yeah.
Oh,
Pickleball, a growing community that's
Yeah.
exploding.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, great.
Yeah. So I think, you'll see ones that we've talked about are the jazz community. And there's another thing that's interesting about like a community is sometimes communities don't agree about everything. And so that's something that's just to keep in mind too. And even in our community, the jazz community, there are plenty of disagreements.
Including what that word means, jazz.
Yeah.
That might be the thing we agree on least.
Right, yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, so it's just something to keep in mind is that just because we have a community doesn't mean we don't have controversy.
Mhm.
So that's something that has been part of these projects for sure, where we had disagreements and we had to find a way to work them out and get to the end of the project, still talking to each other, or at least still working together. Sometimes we didn't make it that far, but
Does anyone belong to any creative communities? I'm curious. Oh, great. Yeah, I was hoping everyone would raise their hands, that everyone loves something creative, right? And something specifically creative. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Sure. I mean, if it's creative, yeah.
Hmm.
The foundation, friends of the library, and several of us in this room have been creating a library at the Broadway Learning Center for ever.
Wow, great. And I just realized that none of that was mic'd, so I'll try to recap that for the recording. But there was a community member that is in a community choir and just enjoys music. And then what's your name? Linda was saying that here literacy is important at the community college through the library and its programs and the foundation. So great.
Let's keep moving.
Sure.
Okay, so we wanted to give you 3 examples that we've been involved in to kind of stimulate your curiosity about this. So one is views of an urban volcano. So we'll tell you about that in a minute. From Maxville to Vanport. And then this one, Dizama, musical vagabond. So we'll start with views of an urban volcano. You want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. Just a brief introduction as to what it is and what it's going to be. It is not yet anything. It will be something. I guess that's not true. It is something and it will be more. That's a way to put it.
It's in progress.
It's in progress. Views of an Urban Volcano is a project that is a joint project between the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble and the Montevilla Jazz Festival. And its subject matter is Mount Tabor. And if you're not familiar, Mount Tabor is a beautiful park in the city of Portland. It has been a part of Portland culture for a very long time, including way before there was even a Portland. And we have, when I say we, I'm talking about both organizations. We have narrowed it down to 3 composers who are going to compose pieces for the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble, which is a large musical ensemble. And that will be performed at the Montevilla Jazz Festival in the late summer this year. Anything to add to this?
Yeah. So we had an application process and composers applied to be part of the project. We had a group of almost volunteer panelists that reviewed all those applications. There were 30, almost 40 of them, 37, I think. So listened to some of their music and read some ideas that they shared about what they might want to do and about their background, and then picked 3. It was very hard. It was a very hard decision. There are a lot of great applicants, but yeah, that's the basic idea was that, and we'll show you some pictures of the process, but we wanted to have these composers, and we know at the end, September 1st, we have a concert, and it's going to be in the park. So then it's a matter of getting the composers to that point in a way that is community informed. So creating opportunities for them to speak to people, to hear more about the park, to learn about it from various perspectives of different communities that all have some connection to this place, and then to create music that is inspired by that process and the place, and to share it back with this community. Here, I have a few photos. Oh, this is like all that stuff we just told you. So we don't... But anyway, it's all there. So, but yep, we said all that. So we'll just keep going. So this was an event that we did. This is at the Oregon Historical Society. and it's in downtown Portland. Does this thing have a, oh, it does. So this is Professor Daryl Milner, who is retired from Portland State University and taught at the Black Studies Department at PSU for several decades and has written many great books about Oregon's Black history and film and I think a couple other areas. But he talked about you might have heard about this, but there was a sculptor that put a bust, which is a statue of like the head of York. And York was a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. He was the only Black person that was part of that expedition and was enslaved by William Clark. And so we talked about that history and also just the idea of how interesting it was that we were there talking about it because of a piece of art that was placed up there. I mean, otherwise York never set foot on Mount Tabor, but we're talking about him because of what happened on Mount Tabor. And so it was just an interesting thing. Oh boy, now I have to remember everybody's name and I wasn't prepared for that.
I wasn't prepared for that either.
Yeah.
We could say what
Oh
they
yeah.
do.
No, this is Dr. Marie Wong.
Yeah.
She's a professor at Seattle University and has written about Chinese American history. And there was on Mount Tabor, there was a small group of Chinese men that were cutting wood and they were loggers and they were living at Mount Tabor Village at that time, which is what it was called. And so she talked about that history and how it had to do with Portland and what happened on Mount Tabor and the surrounding area.
Douglas?
No, this is he's a representative from the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and gave a kind of indigenous perspective of Mount Tabor and kind of look way back into history, kind of beyond history, a prehistoric, kind of beyond time, into time immemorial is the way he put it. But anyway, that perspective all the way to the present in terms of how indigenous people are interacting with this place. I can't believe I don't remember names. And this is Hap Pritchard. And Hap is a former EPA scientist, but he is was connected because he's a volunteer with the Friends of Mount Tabor, which is a nonprofit that
They take care of the park.
does park restoration stuff, and they give tours and they run the visitor center. So he talked about just the park from a zoomed out perspective of like the ecology of the place and just what's been happening there since it's been a park, basically. So that's a little over 100 years of history there. And then another thing I wanted to show you about this picture is, so there's an audience, like it's a little bigger than this room, and it's pretty full. That was really exciting. But then these three folks here, this is one of the composers. His name is James Powers. This is Cyrus Nabipur. And then this here is Kirsten Volness. And so those three are the composers that were doing this project. And so it was really important to us that they were in the front row, literally, listening and asking questions. And also not only that, but also hearing questions from the rest of the audience. And so it was just a great way for them to learn new things about the park. And let's keep moving here. There we go. Okay. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. This was a tour that we took, a guided tour, and that's Lee's, right? Lee's Gervais.
Yep, here. This is
wearing that knit cap and green folder. She was leading us around Mount Tabor Park, talking about the flora, the fauna, important historical events that may have happened. And the composers were all on this, and as well as community members, and asking questions again and kind of getting input into what makes the park cool and why people love the park.
Mm-hmm. So like one kind of fun example is that she showed us there were a bunch of dandelions growing on this particular hill, and they're saying, we used to, or I guess it was the city of Portland, like the Parks Department, used to spray, like a pesticide to get rid of dandelions. And they've stopped doing it since because, what was it, goldfinches?
Yeah, goldfinches.
Yeah, goldfinches in particular really like, it develops into the little seed puffball thing, that the goldfinches really like that as a food source. So they changed the way they managed the park in order to encourage more goldfinches. So like, I would not have known that. So,
And I learned about moon trees from this. Yeah. If you're not familiar with moon trees, an astronaut took some seeds up to the moon to plant them to see if they would do anything, or maybe not on the moon.
not on the moon, but like,
But during a moon mission, they did some experiments in space to see if anything would be different, and it wasn't. But they brought those seeds back down, and then those seeds made seeds. So there's a moon tree planted at Mount Tabor Park, and I just learned about that. That was cool.
Okay. Let's see, we had one other event as part of that project that we've done so far that was, it was like a story sharing event where anyone could come and just talk about what they liked about Mount Tabor. So, just yet another way to kind of hear from more people about the park in that place and just develop perspectives.
And I think the main bullet points for views of an urban volcano is that the composers that were selected by community members also got to hear from community members about what they love about the park, what they'd love to hear in the music. And the composers were also hearing from community members that were part of the panel about important things that happened at Mount Tabor that are definitely going to influence the music.
Yeah, definitely. There was one really interesting question that came up. Somebody asked, what are the sounds that you might have heard at Mount Tabor? Because I think they were thinking about music, and then let's talk about sound, because we hadn't really talked about sound that much. And, one person, mentioned like the birds and the goldfinches, those kinds of sounds. Another mentioned, we were thinking about those Chinese loggers, and so the sound of an axe hitting a tree. And actually, she mentioned how similar that sound was to, I think it was percussion instruments that you hear in Chinese opera music. So again, like something I never ever would have learned about otherwise, but it was just really interesting. So.
And this concert is going to be performed on Mount Tabor. There's an amphitheater in the caldera, they call it, of Mount Tabor, because it used to be a volcano.
Yeah.
So this is all going to come back to where it was inspired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's keep moving. So this is a project. It's called From Maxville to Vanport, and I'll kind of give you a very fast. I can read it this time. I won't ruin it. So Maxville to Vanport is a multimedia concert of songs and short films with live music performed by the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble, featuring vocalist Marilyn Keller, created in a community-guided process. We actually performed this music here at the Rose Performing Arts Center here on campus, which was great. So I'll kind of just explain a little bit. Maxville was a logging town that was built in Wallowa County in 1921. And it was an operation by a logging company that was based in Missouri. Bowman Hicks was the name of the company. And it was in operation for I believe about 10 years. And then the company basically stopped logging operations, but a lot of the loggers just stayed and lived there in the woods. But I heard about Maxville because there's now an organization called Maxville Heritage. So if you ever go to Joseph, Oregon in Wallowa County, it's the northeasternmost county in Oregon. So if you're ever there, go to the Maxville Heritage Museum, and you can learn about it there. But I heard about it because of that organization and got very curious. Vanport, some of you might be familiar with Vanport. Vanport was also a company town. It was built, I believe, in 1939. Maybe 1940. But anyway, it was a shipbuilding town. So it was run by the Kaiser Shipbuilding Company that was building ships for the war effort. And so what happened is that there just weren't enough people in Portland to do all the work that was needed. So there was a national call for people to come work in the shipyards in Portland and many other places as well. And then, so what ended up happening that was very interesting and kind of brings us back to jazz music is that Vanport became a very multicultural community. And at a time when Portland was pretty kind of hostile, honestly, to a lot of African-American residents and other folks from other minority communities. And so Vanport became this place where they could come, they could live. And you know, that's something to note, is that in Portland, there were a lot of discriminatory housing rules where Black people especially were not able to own or rent homes. They were not allowed to live in most neighborhoods in Portland. And that was true like through the 60s, I believe. But it's certainly true in the 40s when this happened. So Vanport is a really important place. It was not, and it was also the second largest city in Portland at its height. Maxville never had more than 600 people that lived there, but Vanport had the second largest population.
We kind of missed part of why Maxville was important too, like from the cultural perspective, right? Like the Maxville was mostly intercultural.
Yep.
But that logging company, what do you remember? What was
Bowman Hicks.
Bowman Hicks recruited a lot of Black loggers from Missouri, I think was the main place. So it was like an importation, you know, of labor to this town, a company town that was made up. Yeah. So both of these places have important Black history in Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. And to connect back to jazz, both the story of Maxville and Vanport were connected to the idea of Black folks migrating in the United States.
Right.
And so there's a very important connection to jazz. Jazz music began kind of just before the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah, sure.
Check me if I'm getting my jazz history wrong, but in New Orleans is generally the place where people say, yes, it was here, although there's some minority opinions that it was more widespread. But anyway, so you've all heard of Louis Armstrong, probably, right? One of the world's most famous jazz musician, one of the most famous musicians ever of the 20th century. But so he grew up in New Orleans. That's where he learned to play trumpet. And he was there. He was a very young person as jazz kind of became its own music, a distinct music. And you know, right around that time, he took a job playing music on a riverboat, right? And so he's going up the Mississippi. He ended up in Chicago. And so if you kind of consider, what if he had not left New Orleans and all the other jazz musicians never left New Orleans, would jazz be what it is today, which is a music that's played all over the world and that has been you know, adopted by people all over the world and
taught in colleges and
exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yep. Would it have ever happened if it were not for this migration of some of these Black folks from New Orleans? So it's kind of this connection about Oregon, you know, how would Oregon be different if this hadn't happened? All these different ideas. And I'll just point some attention at this interesting history so people just know more about the place that we live. That was kind of the idea. But I can show you, I'm going to show you just a little bit of, there we go. So this photograph is Marilyn Keller. And yeah, if you can, you can probably see. So we have a short documentary here. Oh, no, we don't have a short documentary. Okay, maybe we don't have a documentary. There's supposed to be a link here that. Okay, it's not going to happen.
Is it something we could just?
We might. I don't know how I would go about doing it.
I can stall. We can just pull up the link somewhere else. I can.
I don't
tell a little bit
know
about the process and
I don't know how we could.
exit.
Oh, okay, that might help. Is there
So that's Marilyn Keller, the vocalist from the project. She's a Portland jazz legend, if you will.
Yeah.
She's on the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble board now, which we're thrilled about. And the composer of this long piece is Ezra Weiss, well-known composer in the Portland area. And
Should come up right up with this. There we go. Okay,
Cool.
let's give it a
We're
try.
making a
We're improvising.
jazz.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, thank you.
To change a place where no one knows my name.
Maxfield Vanport was actually a multimedia project. It was an attempt to tell the history of both towns.
It explains the reasoning of the loggers and why they wanted to come to Oregon.
Oregon joined the Union with exclusion laws that excluded free African Americans from living, working, and owning land. And so to have this diverse community in 1923 in Oregon was unusual.
Did I realize that just my being there was a revolution?
Maxville is about 14 miles off of Highway 82. The town was approximately 400 to 600 people in Wallowa County. It was a segregated town. It had 2 baseball teams. It had 2 schools. The African American people lived on one side of the town and the whites lived on another.
Loggers were brought out from throughout the United States throughout the 1920s. And it's one of the earliest examples of a multicultural community in Oregon, particularly African American. Our story imagines the idea of someone moving from Maxville after it closed down to Vanport, which was a city kind of where North Portland is today, that flooded in the 1940s.
Vanport had the largest population of Black people in Oregon.
They're both examples of early African-American communities in Oregon and people coming to start a new life somewhere.
Oh, sounds like freedom. Oh, it sounds like freedom. Think I'll go. Think I'll go.
All right.
Yeah.
So there, the rest of the documentary is out there. You can, let's see. There we go. All right, we're back. Move on. Okay. So the rest of the documentary is on YouTube. You can find it. It's just called the making of From Maxville to Vanport. So if you just go to YouTube and search Maxville to Vanport, you'll find it there. And there's also a recording of the music that you can find on streaming sites. You can buy it. But anyway, so that Oregon sounds like freedom. That was a really, just I still love those words. And I don't know that I would have. It just and they're much more meaningful to me after having been through this and hearing the music. And of course, I was like neck deep in this project for like 2 years, but but even I think hopefully somebody that came to the concert and hears the music would have a deeper feeling for what those words mean, and also to see yourself in that as well. So yeah.
And the community had a big hand in guiding this process with similar things to what you saw with the other project, where the composer and Marilyn and the lyricist S. Renee Mitchell, they were getting feedback from folks like you about what they wanted to hear in the music. And at some point, someone was like, I want to hear the blues, right? And so there's definitely like a very blues-based Stack Deck Hand, that's that
Yep,
tune, right?
yep, yeah.
So yeah, that's just a part where the community definitely had a shape in how the art ended up being at the end.
Probably the last thing I'll add is that we did events kind of like this with a kind of public discussion at the Oregon Historical Society in Portland. That's kind of where we assembled, like the Vanport community came a lot there. And then we also did a similar event in Wallowa County in Joseph at the Josephy Center for the Arts, which is in Joseph, obviously. So, but one thing, oh yeah, there's one other thing that was really amazing that happened. After we went through the whole process and the music was done and the short films were done, there was another descendant of Maxville loggers who had been in touch with other descendants who were now spread across the country. And she had been in touch with them just on her own, wanting to document that time a little bit more. And then she ended up bringing all of them who are still alive. And some of them were quite old at this point, but they came to Portland from all over the United States to come hear the concert in Portland. So it was incredibly meaningful and very meaningful to them to kind of see their story on stage in that way and celebrated in music. So it was very touching to me, and I found it to be, I was like, wow, we did something good, I think. So we were happy about that.
Yeah. Quickly, we'll go over this other thing that is also in the works, and then we'll open it up for some questions or feedback. I wanted to, Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble now has something cooking up that the working title is Dazama Musical Vagabond. And we can read it here. The Musical Vagabond is a musical theater piece about a forgotten Portland musician, composer, band leader, created by Third Rail Repertory Theater and Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble. So I stepped into Douglas's very large shoes as the artistic director of the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble, and I started thinking about some things that I might want to do. And I was fortunate enough to be in the pit orchestra for Portland Center Stage's In the Heights production, which is a really great musical theater piece by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And one of the things that I noticed when I was playing guitar in the pit is that the music was like changing so quickly all the time. And I was like, this is not unlike most musicals. Most musicals, like, you never really get to hang out and have a good time doing one thing. It's like you do this thing and then you move on to the next thing. It's in this key now, and then there's a bar of 6, and then, you know, and I kind of wanted there to be a musical that was jazz that had a chance to like breathe and be a musical, like make a musical statement. And so I started thinking about that, and I reached out to a former colleague that doesn't have anything to do with jazz. He's a conductor of classical music in the Metropolitan Youth Symphony. And he pointed me to his wife, who is an actor in the Third Rail Repertory Theater Company. And I started bouncing ideas off her, and then she's like, we should get these people involved. And then so we got involved, you know, we had some coffee meetings and started kicking around ideas like, what is this thing going to be? Well, it's probably going to be a musical, and it's going to have jazz, and what's the story it's going to tell? And we didn't really have a cohesive like idea. We just knew we were going to do something and we're going to figure it out. And these people are community members in that they're in the arts community in Portland. They're not necessarily jazz, but we're going to like combine our communities to tell something, to tell some kind of story in some kind of cool way. And then one day, Raul, who was the conductor that I was telling you about, he got a call to come pick up some donated music and a bunch of other stuff. And he gets these kind of calls all the time, because when you're an arts organization, people want to give you their garage full of stuff that they don't want.
That's so true. I've had that happen many times.
So Raul goes there, he's like, whatever. And then he starts going through boxes, and he stumbles upon a bunch of material from this person, Dazama Muriel, who was a Portland personality. She was a composer and a band leader and a conductor of classical music in Portland in like the 20s and 30s and 40s. And he found there's like boxes of this stuff, but she self-published her own autobiography. And she just ended up just being this like character that like there isn't much known about her. Like there's like one little snippet on the Oregon Historical website, or Oregon Historical Society website about her, and then there's like nothing else on the internet. Like if you're not on the internet, like do you even exist? That's like right, especially if you're a historical figure. But it seemed like she was very important and also very colorful and just like kind of a character. So we're like going through scores and stuff, so we just kind of like landed on it. It's almost, we've been saying it's almost like she reached from beyond the grave to like tap us on the shoulder, like, hey, this would be a good musical about Portland. So that's where we're at right now. We're still in the planning stages of this, but that was just like another example of community guided stuff. Also, like, I guess maybe guided from beyond the grave, but Ghostbusters can give that presentation, not us. But and we do plan to have some kind of community input process as this thing unfolds, maybe a little bit less than Maxville to Vanport style thing, but yeah, that I look forward to this project unfolding. But that's all I got for Dezama. That's her name, Dezama Muriel. And man, she's quite a character. Aside from being a serious classical music conductor and composer, she took this thing around the country, full of instruments, including African drums, and was teaching people music. She took music to people and almost did music to them. Another thing she did is she hopped on a bicycle and rode a bicycle all the way to Chicago for the centennial of the Lewis and Clark Trail, or maybe is it bicentennial? Probably bicentennial. Yeah, quite an interesting person. So is that it? Shall we?
I think we've got what, 10 minutes for, or maybe 0 minutes for questions?
We've got about 7 minutes.
7 minutes,
That's
okay.
somewhere between,
Yeah.
10 and 0. So does anybody have any questions on this?
Comments.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful the way you are connecting with the community and creating connections through art and music, because they have a buy into it and they're going to get their friends and everybody else into it. And so it gets larger and larger. That's awesome.
Thank you.
I was wondering how much of this is helping members of the community to create things themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can speak to the members of my community, one of my communities, as jazz musician / composer. We're creating opportunities for those that may not have them. Like, I think the Views of an Urban Volcano is a great example of that. 2 of the composers are emerging artists. They're not established and the same people that always get the same grants and all that, you know, and have tenured professor positions. These are younger composers that are hungry and they have something to share, and we're giving them that opportunity and money to do that. So that's one example. Can you think of other?
Yeah, I have another answer too, which is that so in these projects, we're all talking about professional artists, right? So even they may not be world famous professional artists, but there are professional artists kind of on the local level in Portland. And perhaps which maybe you're thinking about, you know, maybe people who are amateur artists or hobbyists, you know, things like that, that could be. And I think that the answer to that is that our goal with, you know, this presentation is, and just kind of talking about these types of projects in general, is just to spread the word about them, say, hey, this is one way you can do it. And so the nice thing about that is they're very flexible. And so it could be about, you know, for instance, like you've probably heard of like a quilting bee, right? Where lots of people get together and they make something together. That could be an example. But it could, you know, it could also be about like, you know, there's these community reads projects where everybody in a place reads the same book and they have events and they talk about it. So those are different types of events. And I think that, you know, I hope that one of the messages of a project like this is that, you know, you can look around at what's around you in the present, in the future, in the past, and say, this is perfectly good for us to make our own creative work about our own community, right? And so I think that's hopefully what it shows. You know, a lot of time with jazz, we think of New York. Every jazz musician is like, New York is kind of like the center of our universe. And that's for a good reason. There are tons of musicians there doing great work, and it's amazing. But there's also Portland. You know, it's like we're our own little universe, and our stories are just as good as anyone else's. And I think that applies equally to any other community. You know, take it in your own hands and do it yourself. Learn and do and make and spread the word. You know, so I think hopefully that addresses your question somewhat too, in a different way.
And to follow up on that, do you see other areas that do similar projects that outside of Portland, outside of the Northwest? Are you in touch with anybody else who's doing community guided creativity?
I'm unaware, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Are you aware?
Yeah. I can think of some examples, like, because, I think one thing is like, when we give something a title and we call it, oh, this is community guided creativity. It's kind of just something we made up.
Yeah.
So it's like, just because nobody else is calling it that doesn't mean they're not doing it.
Yeah.
Well, but there was one example, and it was just, I'm thinking of it now because it was just on the radio yesterday on OPB, but they interviewed Linda Woody. No, not Linda. Her last name was Woody, but she's a former poet laureate of Oregon and is now the director of oh boy, now I'm forgetting details. But this is a museum run by one of the tribes in Oregon. And they, some years ago, decided that they were going to devote some of their own money to opening their own museum, because they said, we need a place where we can do it our way, tell our own stories our own way. And that it was, so for that particular community, it was incredibly significant. And so, had a lot of forethought that they were like, I think that, generations hence, are going to really value this place because it's our place, right? And so maybe that's a different example of just things that are happening where a community's input and priorities into a creative endeavor like that is really important. And so I think it is a growing trend. A lot of organizations are looking for more participatory things, where more artists have a say in what happens and more audience members do, and other things. So I think it is a growing trend, and it's not happening all the time, and that's okay too. But I think it is something that's growing.
Maybe you're on the vanguard.
Sorry?
Maybe you're on the vanguard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
I have just two quick thoughts. Okay. And the first was a random one, but we were talking a lot about Portland, and this is Longview. They're not necessarily the same community, but I was thinking about Maxville, logging town, right? And it's near the Columbia River, and it's upstream. And this is a mill town, and it's about 100 years old, right? The Centennial, we saw that.
Yeah.
And Maxville is humming right along during this. I'm sure those logs came through here, right?
Oh, probably.
I mean, they had to have. So there's a connection right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just again, to reiterate, one of the reasons why we did this, we're hoping to inspire that, we can do this in our community here. So Akaya with astronomy, and Linda, right? Was it Linda? And Linda with literacy, maybe there's a chance for a relationship there, right? Where the people that are learning literacy can read some stuff about astronomy in the night sky, and the astronomers take them out there and they can see it for real, right? And there's something that goes back the other way too. So that's just one example, and I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Ryan and Doug for giving your talk today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.